All right, so now I've done a dodge layer, I've done a burn layer, and I've then duplicated that. And then I've used the sponge tool, so I'm going to call it the sponge layer, to try to even out some of the color distortions that happened with dodging and burning. It's still all too colorful, but when I take out all my other layers, just turn them off, and go from where I started, knowing that I want to make this exposure match this photo, and add those in, you can see all of the strong choices I'm able to make just through processing. Now there's another big change I need to make to be able to see these values, and that's to change out the background. I shot on a blank background, but this shoots on a black velvet background, right? So I'm going to quickly replace the background as well. And to do that, I'm going to make a duplicate, and I'm going to use the magic wand with contiguous turned on at a tolerance of 32, and select this background, holding down Shift and adding to it. Luckily, I shot on a blank background. And what I've done is now selected this whole background area. Another way you can do it, especially if you don't have a background that's nice and even, is to just use your lasso tool and draw just inside of your subject. Again, the stylus is very helpful with this, because you want to copy too much information, not too little. Okay, so I've drawn inside my object. I'm just going to add in this little bit of blue. I can modify selections by holding down Shift to add to a selection, and Option to cut away. All right, now I'm going to go up to select, and I'm going to invert the selection. So instead of being the inside of my subject, it's going to be the outside. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate just that selection, Command J. And what it does is it isolates the background for me onto one layer, like this. And a black background is easy to get to. I simply take that layer, I go to Image Adjustments, Levels, and I shift the darks all the way to one side. But you can do it with some finesse, because there is visual information there. So I'm going to take it only as far as I need to. And then when I turn on my photo behind it, you'll see the values and how they work. Now the problem is, then I can take this and make it lower opacity. And then how do I get the edges I want back? Because this looks very artificial. Then I use an eraser at a lower opacity, a nice soft eraser. And I can start to erase that edge away. And transition it. Now that's a full replacement of the background. The other thing I can do is I have this sponge layer copy. I can simply select that background in the same way. I'll just use the magic wand. Okay, and now I am going to burn it. But we're going to use burn in a slightly different way, because if I just keep it at midtones at 15%, it's going to work fairly slowly. So I'll use that just at the edges, the midtones burn. Like so. And now that I've got kind of the edges handled with some finesse, I can go bigger and I can go stronger with my exposure. And I can cover more ground more quickly. Now the difference between just replacing the whole background, this is actually darkening the pixels that are there. But because I'm going all the way to black, it's going to get a little artificial looking pretty quickly. But this way I don't need to worry so much about erasing out the edges. And this is why on sound stages they'll often shoot on blank backgrounds and then replace them later. You know, it used to be green screens or blue screens. As long as you can have a blank enough background that you can select it later, you're able to process it without too much trouble. Okay, and then you deselect, and then you just kind of spot treat the edges a little bit. And I can be pretty aggressive because the image I'm trying to match goes to solid black. And I can always remind myself of what the actual cropping is that I'm worried about. So I don't need to fix it everywhere. I just need to process it within my cropping area. All right. While I'm at it, I can use the big, more aggressive burn to hit some of these big shadow shapes I need before going back to the softer transitions. Okay. And then for good measure, I can still have this layer there to kind of blend in and out if I want. So all these different ways of dealing with these problems. And now we need to worry about color a little bit. So I'm going to make a duplicate of that last layer I did, and this is where I burned the background. So I'll label that. And now I'm going to play with the overall color adjustments. So this will be hue saturation. Actually, even before that, let me do color balance first. So more subtle color alteration. So I go up to image adjustment, and this is all the levels stuff, lights and darks. This next group, this is all color. And my favorite to start with is color balance. And it's more subtle. It's how you can adjust the color temperature. So my light was very warm. This light is very cool. So I start with the midtones, and I'm going to push it away from the reds, and away from the yellows, and away from the magentas. And you see much cooler lighting now. And that helps kind of even out some of my tones. Then I can go to the highlights, and I can look at the highlights here. And I decide, okay, are they warmer? Are they cooler? Maybe just a little bit cooler. And then the shadows. And the shadows are actually, I think, a little bit warmer than the highlights in this image. Though they're so deep, it's hard to tell. Just maybe a touch redder. So color adjustments make a huge difference, and it really changes your lighting. You can do so much in coloring in Photoshop. And then make a duplicate. Now we're going to play with the hue saturation. Sometimes you have to change the color outright. And then, like we did with our contrast and texture projects, we often have to change, using hue saturation, how colorful something is. So except for the eyes, which are fairly blue, there's very little saturation in this photo. So I'm going to take it down quite a bit. You can also darken and lighten, but those are tools better used in value. And then in terms of the hue, you can shift the whole spectrum in different ways. But I want to keep it pretty naturalistic, but maybe I'll just shift it a little bit towards the cooler side of the spectrum. So big difference there now. You see how the skin color is matching up a lot better? And that took 2 steps. That to that. Now the only kind of colorful things that still stand out as needing the sponge tool are these shadows around the eye, where I really had to brighten it up. So now I might make a duplicate, and I go back to my sponge tool, and I'm going to try to correct the color overall. Desaturating with a small brush into some of these areas that feel just too colorful still. And now I'll do kind of spot treatments with dodge and burn as well. And instead of making copies each time, I'll do it all at once. So with dodge, I now might want to dodge the highlights, but I want to be very careful about it. And I need to bring out more light in that eye, so that that highlight's nice and bright like it is there. And more light in this area. Maybe a little bit more light, like a highlight on that cheek, to really catch the light. And you'll see it will mess with the color. So then I go back to the sponge tool and I desaturate it. It will remember your settings. And you just work with it. Now that highlight seems too strong, so then I'm going to kind of spot treat with the burn tool. And then ultimately, then I might have to use the sponge tool to put saturation back in. So it's a lot of back and forth. It's labor intensive. So with the dodge tool for touch-ups, you use the highlights. And then for the burn tool,